The sun blazed mercilessly on the open tarmac, casting long, wavering shadows across the glistening body of a private jet. A man knelt beneath it, his overalls stained with oil, his brow dripping with sweat, his hands steady as they adjusted the final components of a critical repair. He moved with quiet focus, unfazed by the hum of luxury engines above him or the sharp clack of designer heels approaching from behind. She stood there, Isabel Hartley, billionaire heiress, poised and flawless in navy heels and a tailored suit, watching him. Not with condescension, not even with curiosity, but with something far deeper, something even she couldn't name yet, a quiet, disarmed wonder. Around them, staff froze mid-step. Pilots glanced at each other. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft whir of the jet's engines stirring back to life, as if echoing the awakening between two souls. No one could understand it. Why a billionaire would ask a man covered in grease to marry her, until they heard what happened on that runway. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. This is a story about class, character, and the kind of love that doesn't make sense until it does. Noah Carter never looked for noise in a world already loud with judgments. In his mid-30s, with a chiseled jaw hidden under stubble and sunburned skin weathered by years of labor, he worked in quiet rhythms at the edge of a private airfield that rarely noticed men like him. Once an Air Force aircraft technician, he carried the silent weight of a past crash, one that wasn't his fault, but left scars no uniform could cover. Now, he moved through life as if he were still patching up more than just metal. He was repairing fragments of himself with every bolt tightened, every wire tested. His hands, blistered and calloused, told stories his mouth never did. Grease seeped into the lines of his palms, and the stale smell of burnt oil clung to his clothes like a second skin. His tools were arranged with military precision in an old, dented red box, each one resting like a soldier waiting for orders. The hangar around him buzzed with occasional engine roars and the distant clicks of heels, but Noah remained still in his corner of the world, blending into the hum of machines and steel. Isabel Hartley entered that world like a shadow cast in gold. 32, sharp-eyed, and always dressed in something tailored to precision, she carried herself like the world owed her silence and results. Her father had built an empire, and she inherited it all: assets, airplanes, and a throne of glass too cold for comfort. Behind her decisive walk and clipped voice was a woman numbed by the betrayal of those who smiled at her fortune, but never cared for her fears. She trusted no one, loved no one, and expected excellence the way royalty expected obedience. Her heels echoed across the tarmac like a challenge, but inside her fists curled when no one looked. The airfield stretched endlessly in all directions, a wide plain of possibility and solitude. The runway was more than concrete. It was a symbol, a place where planes ascended or vanished, where goodbyes and beginnings shared the same breath. It was where Noah stood, often staring into the vast sky with a wrench in one hand and memories pressing into his shoulders. Where Isabel would pace between hangars with her jaw tight, fighting wars no one could see. They existed on opposite ends of this gray stretch of land, both looking for something they couldn't name, and in the quiet gaps between takeoffs and landings, between metal creaks and clipped commands, a silence hung, thick with the weight of two lives waiting to collide. The jet sat stranded on the tarmac, its polished silver body gleaming under the pitiless sun, while a subtle tremor from the malfunction pulsed through its frame. Around it, a small cluster of mechanics hovered in uncertain silence, each reluctant to approach. Rumors buzzed louder than the engines ever could. No one forgot how Isabel Hartley had humiliated the last man who disappointed her. And so they stepped back, hands tucked into pockets, eyes avoiding responsibility. All except one. Noah Carter wiped his hands on a rag, tucked his battered wrench into his belt, and strode forward without a word. He moved with the calm precision of a man who had faced bigger battles than a billionaire's wrath. Isabel stood nearby, arms folded tightly across her chest, her lips pressed into a skeptical line. Her gaze skimmed over his stained overalls and weathered boots, her eyebrow arching ever so slightly, as if weighing him and finding him lacking. "You look overqualified for the wrong place," she said, her voice low and clipped, slicing through the heavy afternoon air. Noah didn't flinch. He'd heard worse, from louder mouths in harsher places. Instead, he knelt by the exposed panel of the jet, his tools clicking gently as he laid them out like sacred instruments. Silence swallowed the runway. Noah worked methodically, hands steady, eyes narrowed with quiet focus. Every movement was deliberate, almost meditative, as though he were speaking to the aircraft through touch alone. Sweat pooled at his temples, tracing slow, glistening lines down his face, but he ignored it, lost in the mechanical language of bolts, wiring, and unseen currents. Behind him, the whispers carried on like static. "She destroyed Mark's career last year over a 10-minute delay," one voice murmured. "Guy couldn't find work for months." Noah heard it, absorbed it, but didn't falter. He knew fear well, but he'd long stopped letting it drive his hands. Isabel lingered, closer than necessary, her arms a fortress across her body. Her stilettos clicked once on the concrete, a sharp, impatient sound, but she said nothing. She watched the way his fingers moved, saw the care he gave to a task so many others rushed through. Time slowed around them. The world narrowed to just the steady whir of tools and the ragged breaths they both tried not to betray. When the last bolt was secured, Noah rose, wiped his palms on his trousers, and finally looked at her, their eyes locked in a silent standoff. It was Isabel who broke first, her voice softer but edged with something almost bewildered. "Why didn't you flinch?" For a moment, Noah said nothing. He simply stared back at her, sweat and oil smudging his skin, yet standing straighter than any of the polished suits she commanded daily. His answer came with the simple gravity of truth. "Because planes don't care who's rich," he said quietly. "They fly when they're respected." The words hung between them, heavier than any insult or command. For the first time in a long while, Isabel Hartley had no retort. She simply stood there, a woman forged in boardrooms and private jets, disarmed by a man who spoke not to her status, but to something she thought she'd buried long ago. And somewhere, deep beneath the noise of engines and expectations, something began to shift. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long golden fingers across the cracked tarmac, as the repaired jet hummed steadily behind them, its engines throbbing like a heartbeat, slowly gaining strength. Noah Carter wiped his hands on a rag out of habit, though the work was done, and began to walk away, his steps unhurried. To his quiet surprise, he heard footsteps fall into rhythm beside him. Isabel Hartley, immaculate even now with her sharp suit and wind-swept hair, matched his pace without a word. For a while they walked in silence, the wide runway stretching endlessly before them, an open road paved with both emptiness and possibility. It was Isabel who broke the silence first, her voice stripped of its usual ice, raw in a way she probably hadn't allowed herself in years. "Everyone lies to me," she said, her eyes fixed somewhere far ahead where the concrete blurred into the sky. "Everyone wants something. And you—" She hesitated, as if struggling with the words. "You didn't even look at me twice." Noah let out a soft breath, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's not true," he said, glancing sideways at her with an expression that was neither deferential nor challenging, just quietly honest. "I looked. I just didn't see anything broken." The reply seemed to catch her off guard. She slowed her steps, and for a moment it was as if the entire airfield held its breath. Their conversation shifted into something deeper, something dangerous. Isabel pushed, testing him the way she tested every person who ever tried to get close. "You don't know anything about me," she said, voice tight. Noah shrugged with an easy grace that came from surviving harder days. "Don't need to. People show you who they are and how they treat the things they don't need." His voice was low, even, but it carried weight. "You stayed to watch. You cared enough to ask." A flash of defiance crossed her face. She wasn't used to being seen, not beyond the fortune, the reputation, the iron mask she wore. "You don't know what it's like," she said, almost accusingly, "to wonder if every word spoken to you has a price tag attached." Noah stopped walking then, turning fully to face her. The wind picked up, stirring the edges of his grease-smeared overalls and tugging at the sleeves of her blazer. His eyes, a deep and steady brown, didn't waver. "You're right. I don't know your world," he said quietly. "But I know what it's like to lose everything you trusted and have to rebuild from the wreckage." For the first time, real curiosity flickered in her gaze. He didn't make her ask. He just spoke, each word laid down like another brick in a bridge between them. He told her about the crash, the mechanical failure he couldn't prevent, the lives he couldn't save, the nights he spent wondering if a different decision could have changed the outcome, how he couldn't bring himself to climb ladders anymore, how even a maintenance platform made his hands sweat, though he never showed it. Isabel listened, really listened, her armor peeling back in layers thinner than breath. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a man who had broken once and chose every day to piece himself back together without asking for applause. Far in the distance, the first low rumble of thunder stirred, a growl at the horizon. Dark clouds gathered like an omen, yet the first droplets that splashed onto the hot concrete felt less like a warning and more like a baptism. Isabel tilted her head back slightly, letting the rain kiss her face without protest, her rigid posture softening, as if the storm outside mirrored the one quietly breaking inside her. She looked at him then, really looked, and her voice was barely louder than the whisper of the coming rain. "I've built empires," she said, as if confessing a secret she hadn't dared to admit even to herself. "But I never built someone's trust like you just did in 1 hour." Noah said nothing at first. He just stood there beside her, rain darkening his worn clothes, eyes steady, offering nothing but the undeniable truth of himself. And for Isabel Hartley, the woman who owned half the sky, that truth was more precious than anything her fortune could ever buy. The rain had tapered to a soft drizzle by the time they made their way back into the hangar, the vast space echoing faintly with the rhythmic tap of droplets on the corrugated roof. The scent of wet asphalt mixed with the familiar tang of oil and machinery, grounding the moment in something raw and real. Noah moved with his usual quiet efficiency, pulling a clipboard from the tool bench. The completed maintenance report clipped neatly in place. Without looking at her, he extended it toward Isabel. a silent gesture signaling that their brief intersection was over, that he would fade back into the background where he belonged. But she didn't take it. Instead, she remained standing a few steps away, her silhouette framed against the vast open doors, the fading stormlight softening the hard edges she wore so well. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, slowly, almost reverently, Isabel reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and withdrew something small and glinting. Noah frowned slightly, confused as she stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the concrete floor. Without a word, she pressed a ring into his open palm. It was exquisite, platinum, understated yet impossibly expensive. He could feel its weight, cold and unfamiliar against the calluses of his skin. Noah stared down at it, then up at her, bewildered. That was supposed to seal a business deal, Isabel said, her voice barely more than a whisper. An arranged engagement, a merger of companies, not souls. She drew a slow breath, as if the air itself resisted her confession. But I've never made a choice with my heart. Until now. The space between them seemed to thrum with unspoken truths. Noah's fingers curled instinctively around the ring, feeling the fine craftsmanship dig lightly into his palm. He didn't move to pocket it or slide it onto any finger. He just stood there, drenched in silence, trying to anchor himself against the impossible shift happening around him. "This doesn't make sense," he said finally, the words rough, disbelieving. His voice cracked the stillness like a stone thrown into calm water, sending ripples through whatever fragile thing had begun to grow between them. Isabel's eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with the fierce, terrifying clarity of someone stepping off a ledge by choice. "Neither does flying," she said, her lips curving into the faintest, most vulnerable smile he had ever seen her wear. "But it's what makes us feel alive." Her words hit him harder than any demand, any insult, any dismissal he had ever faced. For so long, both of them had survived behind walls of necessity and pride, pretending that standing alone was strength. Now, stripped of expectation, with only battered hearts between them, they found themselves reaching for something neither could name, yet both instinctively understood. Above them, one of the old industrial lights overhead flickered to life, its harsh glow cutting through the dimness with a stuttering pulse. It buzzed, sputtered, then steadied, a single beam casting a small circle of light around where they stood, two figures silhouetted against a backdrop of tools, engines, and forgotten dreams. It wasn't a grand explosion or a cinematic crescendo. It was a subtle, almost invisible shift, a broken place finding a way to mend. Noah looked down again at the ring resting in his hand. He closed his fingers around it, not claiming it, but holding it as one would a fragile promise. Not yet spoken aloud, but no less real. And for the first time in a very long while, he allowed himself to wonder, what if survival wasn't the only thing he was meant for? What if, just maybe, he was meant to soar too, beside someone who had finally found the courage to trust again? The world caught fire faster than either of them could have anticipated. Within hours, the whispers became headlines. "Mechanic marries billionaire heiress." Blogs, tabloids, and morning talk shows devoured the story, spitting out memes and hot takes like sparks from a bonfire. Some hailed it as a fairy tale for a new age, proof that love didn't need pedigrees or price tags. Others sneered, questioning motives, spinning cynicism into every corner of the internet. But through the noise, through the flashing cameras and invasive questions, Noah Carter and Isabel Hartley stood firm, side by side like two survivors weathering a storm that no longer had the power to break them. Behind closed doors, the backlash was colder, sharper. Isabel's board of directors demanded answers. They framed it as concern for public image, for shareholder confidence, but she saw the fear in their eyes, the fear of a woman who was no longer predictable, no longer theirs to control. They pushed her to step back, to sever ties with Noah before it damaged the brand. Isabel listened to every argument with polite detachment, then calmly, irrevocably refused. At the next press conference, standing before a sea of flashing bulbs and restless murmurs, she made her stance unshakably clear. She wore no jewelry except a slim silver bracelet. Her voice was steady, without apology or bravado. Noah Carter is not just the man who fixed my jet, she said, every syllable slicing through the tension like a scalpel. He reminded me what leadership looks like: humility, precision, and honor when no one is watching. And with that, she appointed him Director of Flight Integrity, a role no one had even considered creating until someone like him made it necessary. The stunned faces of the board members faded behind the applause of the staff who knew, deep down, that something real had finally broken through the polished surface of their world. Noah, for his part, moved through the transition with the same steady grace he brought to everything. He swapped oil-stained overalls for fitted cargo slacks and a simple collared shirt, but he never abandoned the floor. Even as he drafted new safety protocols, inspected operations, and spoke at leadership meetings, he still spent hours kneeling beside the young mechanics, showing them how to feel for the pulse of a machine instead of just fixing it by the book. His hands still bore calluses, and he wouldn't have had it any other way. One evening, long after the last engine had quieted and the runway lights blinked against the falling dusk, Noah returned to the hangar. The vast space was empty, save for the faint hum of electricity and the lingering scent of fuel and rain. On the workbench, where he always kept his old red toolbox, something new gleamed under the overhead light. It was a model jet, delicate and precise, crafted with the same reverence he once reserved for real aircraft. At its base, a small plaque caught the light. He leaned closer to read the inscription etched into the metal: "For the man who made me believe again." A slow smile curved his lips, one born not from pride but from something deeper, a quiet, abiding gratitude for a life he never dared to imagine. He turned, sensing her before he saw her, and there she stood in the doorway, no fanfare, no spotlight. Just Isabel, the woman who had once built empires and now built something infinitely rarer: trust. He crossed the space between them in a few measured steps, the echo of his boots filling the cavernous room. No ring boxes, no scripted declarations. Just two hands finding each other in the middle of an empty hangar, fingers intertwining like the final piece of an intricate design. Noah tilted his head slightly, a teasing glint in his usually solemn gaze. "I was never looking for a wife," he said, his voice low and rough, carrying a weight no vows could match. "But maybe I was fixing something meant to carry both of us." And in that silent, sacred space where steel and sky met, where broken things were made whole again, they began. Not a fairy tale, not a transaction, just two people, battered and brave, ready to build something that could fly without needing to understand every reason why. She came looking for another takeoff, another climb into the clouds that had always made her feel untouchable. But somewhere along the cracked lines of an old tarmac, she found her landing, right next to a man who never chased the sky, only earned it, piece by piece, with hands roughened by duty and a heart that had never once forgotten how to stay grounded. In a world obsessed with wealth, status, and the illusion of perfection, their story whispered a different kind of truth, that sometimes it's the unnoticed souls, the quiet ones, the steady ones, who end up teaching the rest of us what it truly means to soar. Do you believe that love can rise from character, not status? Have you ever had a moment where someone truly saw you when no one else even bothered to look? If this story touched something deep inside you, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, in goodness that doesn't shout but simply stands tall. Like this video and join us for more real, powerful stories that lift the human spirit beyond the noise of the world. Thank you for being here with us today. We'll see you in the next story, where love and purpose meet at unexpected crossroads, and where even the most unlikely hearts find their way home.